I worked on the snowy once. It is a podcast of the book written by Michael Holding. This podcast is narrated by Michael Holding.
Welcome to I Worked on Snowy Once, the story of a Yorkshire lad who crossed half the world to help build one of Australia's greatest engineering achievements. My name is Thomas Whitfield, and this is my story. When folk talk about immigrating to Australia in the 1950s, they usually skip the bit over the voyage. They make it sound so simple. You leave England and then suddenly you're standing in Sydney. The truth is, there were 29 days in between and sometimes more. And 29 days gives a man plenty of time to think. And as it turned out, plenty of time to be sick. The Aussies had once been a grand passenger liner, at least that's what people told us. There were polished brass, dance floors, fine dining, ladies in evening gowns, and perhaps that were true for passengers travelling first class, but down where us assisted passage migrants were berthed, things looked somewhat different. Rows of iron bunks, 3 high, packed close together, 60-odd men at a space that would probably should have only held half that number. The air carried a permanent mixture of sweat, damp clothing and uncertainty. Everything arrived with stories. Everyone arrived with dreams. And everyone arrived believing Australia would solve every problem they'd ever had. Triple wages, endless sunshine, big houses, beautiful women, cold beer. Most of us had never seen Australia, but that didn't stop us being experts on it. The Bay of Biscay introduced itself early, without warning, without manners, without mercy. One morning the ship began rolling, then pitching, then rolling again. Plates slid off tables, and men slid off bunks. Breakfast became optional. Most chose not to keep it. A young fella from Kent spent 2 days leaning over a bucket. On the 3rd day, he announced he was returning to England immediately. No one had heart to explain that he'd have to wait until we got somewhere first. I told everyone I weren't affected. Yorkshire's stomach, strong constitution, made of sterner stuff. The truth was, I spent most of those first days gripping the side of my bunk so hard my fingers cramped. Pride and seasickness often travel together. Eventually the sea calmed and the Mediterranean appeared. Blue, calm, beautiful enough to make you forget the Bay of Biscay existed. Men emerged from below decks. Faces regained colour. Appetites returned. Optimism flourished. Evenings became the best part of the day. We'd gather at the rail, shirts off, facing towards the sunset, talking about what awaited for us. A Scotsman planned to become rich. A Geordie intended to buy a cattle station. And an Italian fellow reckoned he'd owned 3 restaurants before he turned 30. Nobody discussed failure. Failure stayed in England. Success was waiting in Australia. At least that was the plan. Meals aboard ship were educational. Breakfast usually involved porridge. The sort of porridge that looked as though someone had accidentally introduced oats to hot water. Powdered eggs appeared regularly. They tasted faintly of tin and disappointment. Lunch wasn't much better. Dinner occasionally improved matters, though not always. One evening they served something described as a roast. The meat sweated more than it had roasted. Still, nobody complained much. A man travelling halfway around the world doesn't become fussy about gravy. The Suez Canal felt unreal. The ship slowed down and sand stretched away on both sides. Dead flat, endless, just empty. Young Egyptian boys ran alongside, waving. The heat settled over everything. Not Yorkshire heat, not even close. This heat had intent. It climbed into the steel, into the walls, into your clothing, and into your bones. Even sleeping became hard work. But by then, friendships had started to form. Funny thing about migrant ships, nobody cares much where you're from after a few weeks. Not really. At first, the English gathered with the English, the Scots were with the Scots, and the Aussies were with the Aussies. But eventually, boredom became stronger than nationality, and card games started, arguments started, but friendships also started. Geordie spent an entire evening singing. By midnight, several passengers were discussing whether he could swim. That were I first became friends with Alec, the Scotsman I'd later worked beside in the snowy mountains. At the time, neither of us knew that. We were simply two young blokes heading towards an uncertain future. We were talking nonsense, solving problems neither of us understood, planning businesses we hadn't yet started, making promises we'd eventually keep. At night I'd lie awake, listening to the engines, steady, relentless. The sound never stopped. The ship always seemed certain of where it was going. I weren't, not really. There'd be moments when the excitement faded, moments when the distance became real. Half a world behind me sat Barnsley, me mum, me dad, everything I'd ever known. And ahead, nothing certain, just possibility. Sometimes I'd wonder whether I'd mistaken courage for restlessness, whether I'd confused adventure with escape. Those thoughts usually arrive about 2 o'clock in the morning. Thoughts often do. The Indian Ocean felt endless. Days blurred together. The sea looked calm, patient, almost watchful, as though it knew something we didn't. We crossed it 1 mile at a time, one sunrise at a time, one conversation at a time. We're getting further away from England every time, but we're getting closer to Australia and closer to becoming different people. Then one morning someone shouted, "Land!" Every man on deck moved at once. Coffee was forgotten, cars were abandoned, conversations stopped. We crowded against the rails. There, far away, a faint line on the horizon. Australia, real at last. Not a newspaper advert, not a dream, not a promise, a place. After a few days, Sydney Harbour appeared, bright, blue, magnificent. The water looked impossibly colourful. The sea seemed bigger, the sunlight sharper. Everything looked larger than life. Australia didn't arrive quietly, it made an entrance. I remember standing there, staring at it, thinking one simple thought, well, I'm here now. There weren't no turning back.